When the desert is dry, a democratic STEM approach to learning in a remote classroom. Rodney Krause, Grade 4 teacher, Reedy Fork Elementary, Greensboro, North Carolina. I would describe Reedy Fork Elementary as an area that remembers being rural. It remembers fields being plowed, flowers dotting the horizon, and now it's definitely more suburban, with new houses going up and the sound of construction filling every day. The school student body used to be predominantly white. Now, only 19% of the student body is identified as white or Caucasian. 7% is identified as other, which includes Native American, Pacific Islander, and multiracial students. 19% of the student body is identified as being Hispanic, and that leaves a majority identifying as either Black or African American at 55%. Our mantra this year, our philosophy, has been to reimagine excellence and embrace diversity as we try and find new and engaging ways to bring learning to students. My students, 19 in total, have chosen or had the choice made by family members to remain remote. That means that they learn digitally with me for this entire 2020-2021 school year. In the beginning of this project, one of the things we did was to do surveys of students to find out where they were. I asked them about science, social studies, reading, and math, about how they felt towards their learning. Now the difference here is that reading and math was done during live sessions. Science and social studies was done asynchronously using the platform of Discovery Education's studio boards. Surprisingly, students identified with more positive feelings towards their asynchronous learning in both science and social studies than they did during their live sessions for reading and math. This brought up a problem. A problem of practice was identified as how might we use student voice to engage students in class projects to get a higher number of students to participate in online lessons. As it would go, there was a partnership between TCS and Discovery Education that offered learning leaders like myself to get involved with a global collaboration project. We lovingly called ourselves Global Flippies. Now what we did was we focused on a real-world problem, bringing in that critical STEM literacy of global hunger. We looked specifically at food deserts. 3 countries were represented: Canada, the United States, and Mexico. We used the platform of Flipgrid for students to pose their responses to topics for over 6 weeks. Each week, starting with an introduction, they were given a topic to research or to build upon. For example, they had to learn the 7 parts to computational thinking strategies. Then they had to think about what food deserts were and how food deserts impacted their local areas. They had to define food deserts, and then also what would make food deserts disappear. How could we bring nutritious food and make it both affordable and accessible to those who did not have it? Students then had to build models in order to showcase their learning. And all 3 countries were involved with 16 educators. That was a total of 560 students with 688 hours of engagement on their own time, since this was a volunteer basis. That was 1,533 responses, with 3,109 of them being comments. That was a total of 61,577 views. And again, this is students who are choosing to do this outside of their typical learning in both science and social studies asynchronous time. With the student voice, students were able to choose which strand of computational thinking they wanted to focus on. With the shared and transformational authority, students had the buy-in. They had to decide where they wanted to do their research, if they wanted to stay local, which country they wanted to interact with, and also what their product would be. They chose to do a public service announcement. Now, this was based on the videos that we would do each week as the teachers to introduce the topic. They themselves wanted to then create a video that would share their learning. And of course, the critical STEM literacy comes in because this is a problem that impacts us all. Food deserts, whether we are in one or near one, impact us each and every one. Tips and reflections. What I would do differently if I were doing this again is that I would streamline my thought process before I jumped in. I did an interview with a colleague, I did a survey with the entire class, and then I focused on a small group of volunteer students to do this project with. In hindsight, it would have made more sense to streamline it by getting the students to volunteer first, then doing the empathy interviews and the surveys so that it stayed consistent and our findings would have more validity. The final project was a PSA or a public service announcement about food deserts. The link will be included in the comments. I hope you enjoy. And if you decide to take on this challenge of bringing STEM pedagogy to your students, democratic STEM pedagogy, I wish you the best of luck. It is beneficial to both you and the students.